Good morning. This is Christy from Mind Rewire. Continuing the book, The Wisdom Codes, and going through these one at a time. I had a little bit of lapse, but somebody got on there and said, hey, can you finish that? So that's exactly what I'm doing. We are in part 3, and actually just starting part 3. And part 3 is on loss. I have a totally different perspective about loss than most people, and even what's contained in here. So as I'm going through this, I'll be expressing that to you and see if maybe it helps a little bit. In the first part here of part 3 on loss, he has a little quote by Norman Cousins, who's a political journalist. And the quote says, "The greatest loss is what dies inside us while we live." The greatest loss is what dies inside of us while we live. And I'm not sure how to express what I think about that, but here's what I would do, because you can look at this from different angles. Take it into your heart space. Go into coherence, even with this little phrase. The greatest loss is what dies inside of us while we live. And if you're talking about, if I take that into my heart space and I sit it with my spirit, my spirit says you want that stuff to die. You want the things around you that are not your innate being to be gone from you. And so the greatest loss, are you looking at it from a human perspective that you have lost something, or are you looking at it from a spirit perspective, which actually means that you've gained something? Your loss in spirit equates to gain. All right. Let me know if that made sense. I'm going to read this first area of the book. There's a couple of this chapter because there's a lot on loss here. And I'll give you my insight as I go through it also. So Gregg says, loss is a universal experience. It's inevitable, it's inescapable, and it's natural. We all lose something each day of our lives. Sometimes our losses are so subtle that they're almost imperceivable. From the time we're young, for example, we see progress changing the faces of the homes, streets, grocery stores, and movie theaters that we grew up with. While the incremental change of a new mall or the loss of a favorite late-night cafe may seem insignificant as it occurs, when we put those changes together and look backward in time, we find that the way we remember our neighborhood is barely recognizable when compared to the version of our surroundings, of our current surroundings. Although our logic tells us that it's natural for our surroundings to change, we rarely give our emotions the opportunity to catch up and adjust to the shift. In our culture, we're expected to just go with the flow and embrace the transformation. The truth is, however, that we need this time to adjust. We need time to acclimate to the void that the loss of familiar things leaves in our lives and our hearts. And I don't even know sometimes that we give ourselves time to recognize that. We just assume it changed because time went by, and we don't ever really even, take a look at it and count it as loss, right? So I don't know where you lie on this, but where I lie on this is that go with the flow state as things change around you is kind of as inevitable as loss is. This is the next paragraph here, while the loss of familiar surroundings rarely brings our everyday activities to a screeching halt, there are other kinds of loss that do, such as the loss of a child, a life partner, a parent, a beloved friend or colleague. Even when we know in advance that our loved one is imminently leaving this world, we've prepared ourselves for the loss, and the preparation in the world does not stop the pain. All the preparation of the world does not stop the pain. Loss hurts. The pain is very real, and the reason for the pain is what makes this group of wisdom codes so powerful. And I would agree with him there. To have something that you can hold on to through a loss is very, very potent. It's a very powerful way to get through a loss. And it's where you perceive your loss that you will need one or more of these codes, right? Does that make sense? Where you perceive your loss is where you're going to need these codes. So he says, why loss hurts? When a loved one is with us in body, there is an energy that we create from the merging of our awareness, our consciousness, and I can't turn the page. Hang on a second. All right, let me start that over. When a loved one is with us in body, there's an energy that we create from the merging of our awareness. Understand this. This is very key and very important. Our awareness, our consciousness, and the feeling for one another. More than a metaphor. This is very real and measurable. It's a very real and measurable field of energy resulting from the bioelectric, biomagnetic, and photonic fields that we emit from the cells of our body, our organs, and our tissues. We know this energy as the feeling we experience when we meet a lover or a dear friend, for example, at a cafe or tea or for coffee. The instant we see them, our eyes light up. We have a big smile on our face and we tingle as our energy comes alive. And this is really a great, this is what he relates it to, a great batch of cocoa peanut butter cookies, reflecting the quality as well as the quantity of the ingredients that we place into this mix. It's that sparkle, the smile, the glow, the tingle that reveals the one-of-a-kind energy that we create in the presence of each other. And he states in the presence of our loved ones. So the more the energetic quality, right, of the person, the bigger the field that you create, and the closer this field entangles with you. So he goes on here and he has a few other things in this. So if you have the book, go through it and read this stuff. The part that we're creating with the bioelectric, biomagnetic, and photonic fields around us based on how we feel about one another is key here. So you have to understand that. When the person is gone, right, when somebody leaves your reality and we consider it a loss, what you're losing is that energy flow, or what you think you're losing is that energy flow. Here's where I differ a little bit in my thought process. And it's because, for a lot of reasons, I would assume, but when my brother passed 2 years ago, it was an apparent suicide. And what happened after his death, immediately after his death, the very next day actually, I was standing in his room and he showed up. Okay, I asked him, what the hell did you do? Like, what the heck? And he was like, never mind this. He goes, let me tell you. And he gave me this sense of peace that has been in me ever since. And the words he told me were, none of this is right. He told me, forget everything you think you know. None of this is right. And I was just like, what? And it was so real, so tangible. And I've seen dead people walking before. I've seen spirits and ghosts for years. But when he showed up, it was so real and so tangible. And the words that I heard were so profound. Forget everything you think you know. It's all wrong. The sense of loss dissipated because what I understood in that moment was his energy field is actually still alive and well. Right? It's all perception. It's how you perceive it. And I will admit this, I have not had another person die since to test this idea, but it's all based in your perception of what you think about death. Because even we know in this country what we think we know about death. In other countries, they don't practice. They don't practice the mourning. They don't practice the 7 stages of grief. They don't practice death the way we practice it and the way we were taught it, the way we think about it. So literally, this becomes a belief system also, right? What we think about loss is a belief system. But let's get to Wisdom Code 9. Okay, so we're going to move on to Wisdom Code number 9, which is, the source was a text from a Buddhist nun who's, if I try and pronounce her name, I'm going to slaughter it. But I'm going to try anyway. Otagaki with a G, O-T-A-G-I or A-K-I. And I'll put her name in the notes below. But the Wisdom Code itself says, the impermanence of this fleeting world I feel over and over. It is hardest to be the one left behind. Use, so Gregg Braden says, the use of this code reminds us that even in the knowledge that all things are temporary, enduring the loss of a loved one is still one of the hardest things we will face, which I would have to agree with that. So the principle of impermanence recognizes that we live in a dynamic world of constant change, and it is precisely because nothing is static that we can expect nothing to last forever. which makes total sense, right? That's just the way this whole thing works. Nothing lasts forever. So the teaching itself, or the code itself, says the impermanence of this floating world I feel over and over. It is hardest to be the one left behind. The Buddhist nun's perspective is this: the teaching of Buddhism typically refer us to the words and remedies of the Buddha himself when it comes to healing and suffering from the loss of a loved one. Wisdom Code 9 offers us something different. While its roots is firmly planted in Buddhist philosophy, the code invites us beyond the obvious reminders that we live in a world of impermanence and suffering. While acknowledging these truths, the code goes deeper and invites us to embrace a more intimate and exclusively human dimension of what we endure as loss. The fact that this is, and he says it right there, is exclusively a human dimension. Loss is exclusively human. That's interesting. Try and meditate on that for a little bit. The wisdom code is an attribute to this nun, and he states her name there, born in 1791. In addition to becoming a nun later in her life, she was also a renowned potter, expert calligrapher, and respected painter, as well as one of the 19th century great poets. Wisdom Code 9 is an example of her work, and it encapsulates two of the foundational Buddhist principles. A close examination of this code reveals the elegance of its meaning and the power that it conveys in consciousness. Excerpt from the book, so this came from the book Rengetsu, Life and Poetry of Lotus Moon. It's compiled by a translator named John Stevens. The first line of the poem follows the template of traditional Buddhist thinking and reminds us of the temporary nature of all things. The first line, remember, was the impermanence of this floating world I feel over and over. After stating the fact of life's impermanence, however, in the next line, she reveals why she's feeling the repeated impact of loss. The reason is that all things, regardless of how old, how reliable, how sustainable, or how loved, are temporary at best. It's precisely because of the temporary nature of all things, including our loved ones, that she says she experiences impermanence over and over, as we all do. Each, by our loss, we are reminded of a universal certainty. We live in a world where nothing lasts forever. The second line of the poem is where she deviates from the traditional Buddhist objectivity as an observer to the humanness of an experiencer. She expresses a universal feeling when she states that the impermanence she experiences means to her on a very intimate level. It's hardest to be the one left behind. So we are going to take that and use this wisdom code in a repetition, and doing so in the affirmative, so that it imprints on the subconscious mind. We create heart-brain harmony by doing the 3-step process. I'll walk you back through that. And then recite the code line by line. We're going to say it a few times. I'm going to leave you in heart coherence and bless you before we even get to that point, that this code aids you in your loss, that it aids you in getting through your loss and just recognizing the impermanence of this floating world, and giving yourself a break, because it is hard to be left behind. All right, recognizing whatever left you, whoever left you, that their spirit has not gone, right? Their spirit has not gone. Their spirit remains. And it's the energy that we miss the most, and we notice it from a physical perspective. So if you can start noticing it from an energy perspective, right, without the physical, it'll alter your perception of that. With that, I want you to take 3 or 4 nice deep breaths. It's going to be a huge inhale and a nice long deep exhale. So we're slowing and regulating our breathing. A big inhale through the nose. Round your rib cage open. And then a nice, long, deep, slow exhale. One more time, a big inhale. And a nice long deep exhale. Bringing your hands over your heart space. And then I want you to hear the words of this wisdom code. The impermanence of this fleeting. And I want you to hear the words of this wisdom code. And I want you to hear the words of this wisdom code. The impermanence of this floating world I feel over and over. It's hardest to be the one left behind. The impermanence of this world I feel over and over. It's hardest to be the one left behind. The impermanence of this floating world. Can you be the objective observer and notice this floating world? And just observe the impermanence. And then recognize it from a state of humanness as happening over and over. And in your state of humanness, recognizing it's hardest to be the one left behind. Keeping your awareness inside your heart space. And recognizing the impermanence of this floating world that I feel over and over. It's hard to be the one left behind. And in this space of the heart, I witness myself as light. I witness you as light. I witness my loved ones as light. May the peace from all that is be in you.